I missed my graduation from HBS. I found on stage today I was not the only one. Dean Noria missed his graduation from MIT as well. In my case, right after finals, I went right home to California, and it just seemed too far and too expensive to come back for a day. So, can I ask your moment of indulgence? There is a photo I've got to get for my mom. Okay. Smile. There we go. Thank you. I now know how I got into HBS. Being on the board of Dean's Advisors, we get to see the historic statistics on the school. The data shows that MBA admissions took a slump, a deep dive in the early 70s. In fact, HBS admissions, applications that is, the applications dropped by almost a third in 1 year. Thank goodness. Now I know how I got in. After graduation and stints at Procter & Gamble and Bain & Company, I co-founded with Tom Prue Intuit. And our experience proves that old adage that behind every successful entrepreneur is a supportive spouse and surprised in-laws. And it wasn't just the in-laws that were surprised. When we tried in the early days to get venture capital, now keep in mind I worked at 3000 Sand Hill, right in the center of the world's capital of venture capital. Guess how many VCs lined up to invest? None. So we had to bootstrap. So today I'm going to cover one thing that I wished I knew when I graduated, something I had not yet learned. And let me illustrate with a story. I was the CEO of Intuit for the first 11 years. By years 9 and 10, as the company kept growing, increasingly I began to feel that I was a little bit underwater, that the skills the company needed in its leader were skills I didn't seem to have, that the problems we needed solved were ones I didn't like and really wasn't very good at. By year 10, it became clear to me that I was holding the company back, that I was the risk of our company going from success to failure. So I made a decision. I held off on the decision a bit. We were just doing a major acquisition of a company nearly our size. But at the first meeting of the newly combined board of our company and the one we had just acquired, I told the newly assembled directors that I planned to step down as CEO because I did not want to any longer risk holding the company back. And that we should go find together, and I would lead it, finding a CEO who had the skills I didn't, who was complementary. So we did that, and thank goodness we did. The guy we hired, a guy named Bill Campbell, had every skill I didn't. He was a phenomenal leader for us. Now, I can't complain. Things have turned out well. We're a lot larger now than we are then. We serve 60 million people. Our market shares range in general from 60 to 95%. Our market cap, the company, is now worth 40 times more than when I ran it. More than that, we've got a great CEO, Brad Smith, and I get to pick what to do, and he's got the tough job. Still, I know, when I look back, that I let the company down in my final years as CEO, and I let myself down. What I was unable to do was to grow my skills at the rate the company needed. I failed in my ability to develop myself, to grow and change. Now, I've spent some time thinking about this and working on this problem. And what I've come to believe is all of us are bundles of stuff. We're bundles of biases and beliefs, of predilections and behaviors. Some of those are conscious, some not, for better and for worse. The best of those are our strengths. The rest of those are our weaknesses, our foibles, and worse. The good news, and there is good news, the good news is those bundles are not fixed. You can change. I've seen people who seem to be able to change and grow as the situation needs. They take their strengths and make them stronger. They take their weaknesses and minimize or neutralize, or in some cases, even take a weakness into a strength. They seem to have an accelerator pedal when it comes to personal growth. And then there are those who can't, who don't, who seem to have a brake on their personal growth. Now, the tough part is the person we know least well is ourselves, or at least the one we have the hardest time seeing clearly. We can't see ourselves as others do. You know, Richard Feynman was right when he said, when it comes to yourself, the easiest person to fool is yourself. It gets even worse in a position of leadership. And the higher you go, the worse it is, because your people are not telling you the truth about you. They're giving you some sugar-coated Pollyanna view. Oh, that's great, boss. And all the bad stuff you do, the stuff that annoys and hurts, well, they grouse about that behind your back. They're not going to tell you. So I've learned you've got to do interventions. This does not happen naturally, at least not for me. So I've worked up over the years 7 things that I do to try to make sure I'm getting better. I'll share 3 today. The first is to dig for feedback on yourself. Now, I did not do this. When I started work, I waited for my boss to give me feedback, which is the moral equivalent of taking the steering wheel for your life and handing it to someone else. And then other times I assumed blithely that no feedback meant everything was great. Oh, if that were only true. And when I was CEO, I did not have the courage to ask for feedback. So that kept me from learning. And what I've learned is the most important learning you need is the learning about how you need to change and grow. I get to be on the Procter & Gamble board, and I get to watch their gifted CEO, A.G. Lafley. And when he talks about his team, the lieutenants in the company, he says he doesn't have room on his team for anyone who is not a lifelong learner, who's not a self-learner. Now, these are people with 20, 25 years of experience in that industry, in that company. And he still says they've got to be lifelong learners. And I find it starts with digging for feedback on yourself. I'll give an example. It was about 10 years ago that we decided, and I really led this, that we had to move our company to be much more engaged with design, to adopt design thinking, to make our products ones that people would love to use. So I led the effort personally, and it culminated in a launch event to begin the capability building at the company. We gathered our top 300 executives for 2 days, and we dedicated 1 day just to design and design thinking. And I led that personally. There were my ideas, working with a team. I sweated every slide, and it was a massive 6-hour presentation. Death by PowerPoint, I now believe. In the middle, for variety, we inserted a speaker with experience at IDEO, the design firm. He gave a few slides, but then quickly went to a 40-minute exercise where everyone in the audience had to do stuff. Afterwards, in the days and weeks after, I asked the attendees, okay, what were your takeaways? It was not what I expected. 80% of the takeaways were from the 40-minute exercise. from the 15% of the time was 80% of the takeaways. I was stunned. This rocked my world. This move from understanding you change behaviors not through talking at people, but through engaging them in exercise where people learn what they do, has changed what we do in the company. It's changed how we build capabilities. We do company meetings now where 80% of the time is spent with people doing actual exercises, practicing what we need done. It's changed how I teach. It's changed how we run board meetings. It's changed how my wife and I back social enterprises with our foundation. And all because of the feedback, all because I stopped believing what I had done was right and asked for sincere feedback. Now, it's not natural to ask for feedback and truly listen. Our natural instinct is to be defensive, to explain. But that stops the learning process. I find I have to swallow that human nature and just listen to understand. Not to respond, which you get trained here to do. Listen to understand. We're now training our leaders, and they're working on training their people, on institutionalizing this in the company. Having people post publicly their goals, and then ask every month for feedback from their colleagues, from their boss, from their other stakeholders, from customers on how am I doing? How am I doing on my goals? And then they have to summarize, each employee has to summarize that and then tell their boss, here's what I'm learning about how I'm doing. I've now learned that feedback is a gift, and you have to seek it. So dig for feedback frequently on yourself is one thing that I think I've learned. The next is get a coach. Here's a story. So for years, I'd observed an executive coach that we had hired, who works with us as a contractor, and coaches executives who might need help. Well, I looked at what he was doing, the 360 interviews that he would do on some of our leaders, and I said, I want that. I could use that as the only guy in the company who doesn't get a performance review. You know, I'd probably have some deferred maintenance. So I asked him to treat me the same way that he coached the other execs. He did a 360 of folks that I work with commonly, sat me down, and it was not pretty. I had a lot of deferred maintenance. I had bad habits. I had things I did that pissed people off, that left people demoralized, that got in the way, that created rework, confusion. Some of this I had vaguely sensed, but could not see clearly. It was deeply mortifying. I got sick on stuff that was happening that was me. Well, I went on a tear. I had to fix this. So together with his help, I then went to everyone that was in that interview set and the others who should have been and said, look, here's what I heard. I heard this, 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 and this, and I'm going to fix that. And I'm going to ask your help. You got to help me when you see me backslide, because I'm not going to be good at this, maybe ever, but at least not for a while. I need you to tell me, and I will ask, how am I doing? You got to help. That's almost a decade ago, and it's been a tough but joyful ride. It is so cool now to get in a situation and to remember how I would have handled that, and then to handle it in an entirely different way that works out so much better. You know, every great athlete has a coach, whether it's Tiger Woods or Tom Brady or Serena Williams or Ronaldo. They all have coaches. And if a human with such personal physical gifts needs a coach to reach their peak, what about us normal people? In Signy's and my philanthropic work, we've been longtime funders of Khan Academy. We've gotten to know Saul. Saul, one of the most gifted visionaries on the planet. And not just visionary, he turns it into action. The world's most prolific educator. He's now turning into a great leader as he leads his organization. And Saul Khan has a coach. In fact, it's the same coach that I use. Now, coaches can be of many types and colors. It could be a boss who really cares that you really engage deeply. It could be a coworker who, because of your urging, will actually tell you the truth. It could be an outside expert, could be a mentor or another stakeholder. They come in many shapes. My first coach, really, was here at HBS. One of my section mates, Peter Wendell, who was then older and wiser than me and has always been older and wiser than me. In fact, when I was struggling with a decision of whether to give up the CEO job, it was Peter that I went to. And it was Peter who helped coach me through that. So coaches can be of many kinds. But to me, the common things are they've got to see you work. You can't coach an athlete if you don't watch them on the field. So they have to be able to see you work. And then you got to give them permission to talk to anyone about you, totally confidentially, and never reveal sources. And then you got to listen. Because more important than the coach is you. You got to own it. You got to want it. You got to be hungry for it, no matter how painful it is and how you struggle to understand. It'll only work if you want it. Here's an example that I remember from the first months after we promoted Brad Smith, our current CEO at Intuit. One of the rites of passage of a public CEO that you get no practice for in advance is you have to lead the quarterly earnings conference call with investors, where you walk through what happened in the business and then answer their questions. And let's say for many of those investors, diplomacy was not something they learned in business school. After the first earnings conference call that Brad did, immediately after, he asked me, so how did I do, Scott? And, I'd been looking at his performance, and I told Brad, honestly, I thought you did great. I thought you really, I'm kind of a tough grader, but I got no suggestions to make. The next day, he comes into the office, and he had watched, or rather listened to the audio recording of the conference call. And he came in and said, Scott, I've now thought about it. I see 3 things I could have done differently and better in yesterday's call. Here they are, A, B, and C. He walked me through them. All I could say is, you're right. You're right. All 3 of those are things you could have done better. I remember that day like yesterday. 2 reasons. One, I suddenly slept a lot better, knowing I had entrusted my company to someone who was so manic about self-improvement. And I also saw, boy, I got to up my game. He's way ahead of me at this. Okay, so get a coach. The third idea that's been helpful is some words from Kim Clark, former professor and dean here at the business school, who taught me the words for this concept: savor surprises. Another story. So we had a very successful first product in Quicken, ultimately. Though we struggled for years, it eventually took off. Personal finance, I built the company in kind of the image of Procter & Gamble of how can you build technology for consumers to use in their homes. Quicken Personal Finance was the first product. We noticed over time something funny in the research, that half the users of Quicken were not what we expected. They claimed to be using it in a business. That made no sense. This was a home product sold in a garish orange box. It looked like a Tide box. So we ignored it. Every subsequent research piece that we did showed the same thing. Half of them were using it in a business, but I ignored it. It didn't make any sense. And we stayed focused on our strategy, personal and home. Well, after a few years, multiple years, 4, 5 years, it bugged me. Why are people answering this question wrong? So we went out and savored the surprise. We dove in to go out and interview the people who'd answered that they were using it in the business. We went and visited them. We watched what they were doing. And by God, they weren't doing their homework in the office. They were actually using it to run the books of a business, small business, businesses of 3, 5, 10, 12 employees. This opened our eyes to something we had not possibly imagined. We believed, like everyone had believed, every expert will tell you, every accountant will tell you, the only way to keep books in a business is with debits and credits, the double entry accounting. And the whole world assumed that, and every accounting software product was built on debit and credit accounting. We had assumed that's the only way to do it. Until we confronted this surprise. We'll do some market research here. Who took accounting? Raise your hand. Okay? Who loved accounting? Keep your hand up if you just loved accounting. Good. Thank God there are few. But most of you who put your hands down are what are called normal. Most people don't know a debit from a credit and don't want to learn. In fact, they think that General Ledger was a World War II hero. So, that surprise led us to build a new product, unlike any in the world, the first accounting software with no accounting in it. Now, the experts thought we were all wrong. No competitor copied because they were convinced we were wrong. And though we had some snafus at launch, within 2 months of launch, QuickBooks, the name of the product, was the best-selling accounting software in the country. It rose on the desktop, the old disks, to a 90 share, and today QuickBooks Online has a 70 share. All competitors in low-end accounting, where we compete, are now out of business except one that sold itself to a British company. This business is now 50% of our company. The original Quicken business is about 3%. All because we savored a surprise. A surprise that I had resisted even looking at for years. Now, it turns out this is not unique. When Peter Drucker wrote about innovation, great book, by the way, Peter Drucker's book on innovation, the #1 source, he claims, of innovative ideas are the unexpected, the things that happened you didn't expect. In PayPal's case, PayPal was trying to sell themselves as a PDA to PDA money transfer system. Ever seen anyone do that? It didn't work. But oddly, some customer emailed them saying, hey, I want to use PayPal in my eBay auction. Well, the company had never even contemplated that and debated whether to allow her. Fortunately, they relented. PayPal became the standard way that buyers and sellers settle their transactions on eBay, became hugely successful, is worth, we'll see when eBay goes public independently from PayPal in another few months what they're worth, but something like $20 billion. All because of a surprise from a customer. You know, even that early learning that I mentioned about exercises beating lectures for learning, that was a surprise. So, savor surprises. Dig for feedback on yourself. Get a coach, savor surprises. That's what I've learned about how to do the most important thing for your career. Make sure you're changing and developing yourself. Now, I want to get back to my opening. As you know, I missed my graduation here. So for me, my finale at HBS were the last lectures of my second-year professors. And I've remembered one to this day from Professor Ben Shapiro, who I talked to again just a few weeks ago. He's not here. He was conflicted, so couldn't come here today. But I remember what he said. He said, you can choose. You are among the luckiest people on the planet by virtue of where we are graduating from. You will have choices and options beyond most people's dreams. And so you can choose. You can choose what your life adds up to. You can choose the purpose of your work by the company you join. You can choose the values that you stand for by the team that you join. You can choose. Know that you will adopt the values of the company you join. You can choose what purpose becomes your life. And I've never forgotten his words, you can choose. Now, let me mention the two words that audiences worldwide most want to hear from commencement speakers. In conclusion, let me finish by mentioning what matters most in life. And it's something you do together with another as a couple. Maybe best summarized by Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, the Chinese tradition. He said that when you love someone deeply, you give strength. And when you are loved deeply, you gain courage. So I wish you both strength and courage. Thank you.